Andrew, I think you can get it started whenever you're ready.
Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and get the ConnectRVA 2045 Advisory Committee meeting started. Again, all of us are joining the meeting virtually via Zoom, and there was a statement within the agenda packet that talks about how members of the public can participate remotely as well. So we'll go ahead and get started with the attendance by roll call. Nicole, if you want to go ahead and call the members' names.
Thank you, Andrew. We'll start with Chesterfield County, Ms. Smith. Ms. Benedict.
Here.
City of Richmond, Ms. Clark. Mr. Bridewell.
Here.
Ms. Erickson. Mr. Steele. Goochland County, Mr. Coleman.
Here.
Mr. Kilduff. Hanover County, Mr. Vidunas.
Here.
Mr. Flagg. Henrico County, Ms. Smidler.
Here.
Ms. Deemer. New Kent County, Ms. Leduc.
Here.
Powhatan County, Mr. Pompey.
Here.
Mr. Howland. Town of Ashland, Ms. Amos. Mr. Tucker. Capital Region Airport Commission, Mr. Rutledge. GRTC Transit System, Ms. Torres. I think Adrian is here. I'm going to double check that when I get finished with the roll call. Ms. Del Ross.
Here.
RMTA, Ms. Simmons. Plan RVA, Mr. Parsons.
Here.
Mr. Ariel.
Here.
Ride Finders, Ms. Tisdale. Mr. O'Keefe.
Here.
DRPT, Ms. Dubinsky.
Here.
Mr. Sparks. VDOT, Ms. McAdory. Mr. Herman. VCU, Mr. Leonard.
Here.
NAACP, Mr. Johnson. Richmond Area Bicycling Association, Mr. Burnley.
Here.
Virginia Asian Chamber of Commerce, Ms. Tran.
Here.
Senior Connections, Mr. Williams.
Here.
RVA Rapid Transit, Mr. Campbell. Bike Walk RVA, Ms. Lockett Gordon.
Here.
Port of Virginia, Ms. Nelson.
Here.
Mr. Reinhardt.
Here.
Southern Environmental Law Center, Mr. Pollard.
Here.
Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities, Mr. Reveley. Virginians for High-Speed Rail, Mr. Plower. Federal Highway Administration, Mr. Duran.
Here.
And Tri-Cities MPO, Mr. Swikowski. I'm going to circle back to GRTC Transit System. Adrian, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The agenda packet was distributed prior to the meeting. Are there any changes or amendments to the agenda as presented? Since there are no changes to the agenda, we need to approve by consensus the meeting summary from October 22nd, which was our last meeting. Are there any questions, comments, or requested changes to the meeting summary? All right, since I'm not hearing any requested changes to the summary, begins on page 2 of the packet, we'll consider those approved. So, and move on to agenda item number 3, which is the public comment period. Are there any members of the public that would like to address the advisory committee? Doesn't look like anyone has raised their hand or any members of the public are interested in speaking. So we'll move on to agenda number 4, which is process update task number 2, vision, goals, and objectives. And I think Barbara is going to lead us through that particular item.
Thank you, Andrew. It's good to be here with you today. We started our discussion on vision, goals, and objectives. Well, we've always been talking about them, but we had breakout groups at our last meeting on October the 22nd and got a lot of good feedback from you all. And then we have taken it further to others and to the board last week for them to kick off a public review period. Actually, the week before last, so it's December 4th through the 18th. And you can go on the next slide. So where we are in this process, of course, is up here in box number 2, our strategic direction. And what we've heard from, our different surveys over the past months, as well as from you all in our discussion last October or this past October. A lot of good feedback, and staff has taken that along with the nearly 1,000 survey comments and blended that into the vision, goals, and objectives. Next slide. And you can see where we are in the process. We have synthesized that here in the purple box and taken it to you through from our introduction back in October to now the input session that's part of the public review process. We've introduced it to the policy board and kicked off the 15-day public review period. And then after that is complete and we get further comments from you all in response to what we've heard from the public, we'll take it to the board in January is the schedule. So that's next slide. Just to review, this is what's posted on our website currently. Would invite you to, we have certainly more days this week as well as into next week before we take it back to the board for consideration. But essentially we have a central vision, 7 guiding principles, and 5 goals with some key objectives that will be guiding the development of the LRTP. We invite you to take another look at it and please let us know either by email or you can post directly on the website, or you can certainly reach out to me or Sulab or Chet with any comments you have. Are there any questions today or further comments today? Okay, well, thank you.
All right, so I guess the next agenda items, number 5, I think Sulab is going to lead us through task 3, planning.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I'll be talking about the 3rd and the 4th phase of the LRTP process, as you are all already familiar with the process. So as Barbara mentioned, we are still in the public input period, actually the formal public review period for goals, objectives, and the vision for the plan. And simultaneously, we are working to develop the project list for the long-range transportation plan based on the phase 1 in which we identified the transportation needs. So we are still working on it. We got the project list addressing the transportation issues from most of our project champions. Staff is reviewing it and we'll get back to the champions again for the final say on that. Some of the projects in transit and rail, we are waiting on some further guidance on those, especially the rail projects, because it's a matter of question whether the rail funding, which is DRPT's rail funding, that be available for the constraint plan or not. We haven't had that in our constraint budget in the future, in the past LRTPs. So this time we are considering that. We're still waiting for that guidance, whether to include the rail projects or not. For transit, normally in LRTP, what usually the transit projects look like are basically capital improvement projects, any right-of-way acquisition, any lane addition like BRT, things like that. So apart from that, any new enhanced service or service extension, those projects, we don't have any clear guidance whether those would be included in the LRTP or not. So still waiting on that. We do have the projects and we do have everything, but just waiting for some further guidance on those things. Obviously, the final objective of this phase or this process is to get a streamlined list of regional transportation projects by all transportation modes. We'll call them the universe of projects. It'll be a single sheet in Excel, not the multiple tabs which we had for the project development, and it'll be streamlined for everybody's understanding. I am thinking of the momentum of more than 200 projects, at least more than 200 projects in the LRTP to be scored, ranked, and prioritized, which we'll be doing based on our discussion with task 4, which I'll present next. The targeted schedule, this has changed many times, but at this moment, I think a February approval by the LRTP Advisory Committee looks reasonable. So we have the project list from most of the champions. Some tweaks needs to be done. And once all the project lists have been finalized, it'll come back to the LRTP Advisory Committee to have a final say, at least a 15-day review period. And once everybody is fine with it, any tweaks needs to be done and things like that, we'll come back in February and ask for your approval for that. So for this task 3, that's all I have today. Is there any questions? Okay, so
I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
finding the unmute button. I have one question. I have a couple projects that we've just developed. Is it too late to submit those projects for consideration?
No, I think you can if it qualifies based on the project inclusion guidelines. I think we still have time for that.
Okay, I'll get those to you here in the next day or two.
Thank you, no problem. Okay, if we have nothing else, I can move forward to task 4, which is the main discussion topic today. Task 4, which is basically the programming. The same process flow. Once we have the universe of projects done, there's basically 2 things in the programming phase. One is development of the guiding, scoring and ranking process. And then the other part is simultaneously is development of the constraint plan. So today we'll be basically discussing about the first task 4.0, which is project prioritization and scoring. The work scope basically is to develop a project scoring, ranking, and prioritization process based on the established performance measures, which would be based on the goals, objectives, and vision. And it was, I guess, presented to the LRTP Advisory Committee in their October meeting. We are just asking for the approval of goals, vision, and objectives for the time being. And the 4th, which is the performance measure, which obviously is part of that, but we need to have further discussion. That's why we're having that discussion today. So the timeline, just for reference, this topic was introduced to the LRTP Advisory Committee in their last meeting. The guidelines, so the 31-page draft guideline was sent to the LRTP Advisory Committee with the agenda packet on December 7th. So we'll have the discussion today. After the discussion, if there's any comments, That period would be from starting today itself till January 10th. At the same time, staff would be working on tweaks and project testing, which we haven't totally completed yet, so that we can present the final findings next time. The guidelines final draft based on today's discussion, as well as the input between now and the next meeting, that deadline would be sent to the advisory committee on January 18th. That's the day in which the agenda packet would be mailed. And then we'll be asking for LRTP advisory committee's endorsement in our next meeting, which is January 25th. So basically, as we all know, we included some surveys in our public outreach. We probably did 2 surveys, which mostly relate with this task. The transportation priorities survey, we can see that safety ranked highest in that priorities, followed by environment quality, accessibility, land use, economic development, and congestion mitigation. Secondly, we did another surveys, the goals vision survey, in which we had laid out, actually broken down the goals. And based on that survey, we again see that safety is the highest ranking, followed by health and equity, connectivity, accessibility, environment, economic vitality, maintenance, which is basically the congestion or mobility, and then resiliency. So we tried to combine these goals so that they could be measurable. Some of the goals like health, a direct benefit from a transportation project just to the health benefit is hard to be measured. So that it's easier for us to have a measurable goal, we combine these goals into 5 categories. Safety, mobility, which is basically congestion, maintenance, resiliency, equity and accessibility, which also includes connectivity, economic development, and then environmental and land use. Basically, we combine those 2 categories into one. So this is the staff recommended goals based on the survey, as well as staff input. We also looked at the smart scale factor weights, as they call. We are in category B, Richmond region. And I think the weights which you see, that was adopted by our TPO board at that time. So we can see that congestion is 15%, economic development is 20%, accessibility 25%, safety 20%, environmental 10%, land use 10%, which we have combined. So it's pretty much similar. There might be some changes here and there, like mobility, we have 10%. In smart scale, the congestion measure is 15%. Accessibility is same. Safety, we have a little bit higher, 20%. Economic development, we have a little bit less. And then environmental land use, we have a little bit higher. So this is up to discussion with the LRTP Advisory Committee. This was primarily based on the survey input as well as what staff thought would be right. Just wanted to clarify that the survey which we conducted, that cannot be considered as a scientific survey, because the survey respondents, they were skewed towards the city, in which like 40% respondents were from the city. And again, looking at the racial composition, the respondents' racial composition wasn't proportional to the region's racial composition. So it was more skewed towards the majority population. So we can't say that the survey is basically what all people want. It's just a survey which we conducted, and that's what the sample of the population wants. So this is up to discussion with the LRTP Advisory Committee. We can discuss now, or we can have further comments after the meeting.
I have a question. Mr. Chairman, would you prefer to have some comments at this point, or hold to the end?
Sulabh, are you to go through the individual performance areas?
Yeah, I'm going to go with all the individual performance areas within each goals, so we can discuss about this later on as well. So
yeah, maybe let's go through the performance areas, and then we can ask some questions. I know I have some questions later for those. So let's hold the questions for a little bit later then.
Sure, thanks. So basically what we have is based on the 5 goal categories, we have established 15 performance measures, and I'll be discussing about them later. We had previously in the last meeting introduced to you the performance measures, in which at that time we had 14. So we added 1 more to make it 15 now. So what basically the consideration was that we wanted to analyze what was meaningful and was impactful for the people. We wanted to have the performance measures which were like fair and accurate, as well as transparent and understandable by the advisory committee, as well as general public. A performance measure which would work in both the urban area, the suburban areas, as well as rural areas, as well as it works for all modes of transportation. And finally, one thing which we also considered was that we wanted to have a minimum overlap between the measures. So we don't want it to have similar measures there. We didn't want the same project. If congestion measure is beneficial to one project, we don't want similar measures which would be beneficial to that project. So we try to include varieties of project. So to test the performance measures, we selected 6 projects, and we tried to select the projects throughout the region, as well as in all modes. So these are the projects we chose. The North Gate and interchange at 64. I think the IMR was conducted recently. Route 288, 360, Bailey Bridge connector, Woodman Road extension, Pole Green Road widening, which is, I think, the project is already in the SIP, but we still looked at that project. Route 1, new transit line in Chesterfield, which just started this year. So just wanted to add that so that we can include some bike the transit project. And then finally, the fall line ATP trail, Chickahominy Crossing, which is a joint Henrico County, Hanover County application to smart scale. So all these 6 projects were considered for project testing. We didn't test all projects for all the performance measures due to time constraint, but we tried to, as far as it is possible, we try to use all the 6 projects in some performance measures. So let's talk about safety. So safety performance measure, as it stands now, is 25% of the total goal weight. And within that, we have 2 performance measures, the crash frequency and crash rate. And this is basically based on smart scale scoring. It's already been vetted by the state. And we do have good source of literature for this. And the PM weights is 70% for crash frequency and then 30% for crash rate. The crash rate for transit and other projects, only the first measure would be included. So that would be 100% for those projects. So for safety, we looked at the Pole Green Road widening projects, basically a widening from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. So to calculate this, what we did is we basically looked at the crashes in the vicinity of the project in last 5 years, from last 2015 to now. And a total of 206 crashes were there, as you can see in the red dots. And we deducted the driving under influence crashes because we think that those cannot be considered as design faults. So those crashes were deducted from that. And only those crashes which were ranked as like fatality and injury crashes and moderate injury, which is basically fatalities and severe crashes, those were considered. So there's something called as the equivalent property damage only, in which we convert the crash into a monetized value. So basically the fatalities and injury crashes, that's $850,000 for each, as well as the moderate injury is $100,000 for each. So this is established EPDO based on states guidelines, which is used in smart scale as well. So we added the EPDO for these moderate as well as severe crashes, and that came out to be, I think, 9 9,700,000. That's for 5 years. And then we divide it by 5 to get the average annual estimated property damage only, which is 1.94 for this project. There's something called as the crash modification factor, which is basically a factor in which if we implemented certain kind of project, the crash reduction in theory would be reduced by that factor. So it's basically a research done in the state as well as the federal level, and they have the CMF crash modification factor for different types of improvements. So for this type of improvement, it's basically adding an extra lane in each direction. The CMF is 0.8. And basically what we calculate after getting the CMF is the percent expected crash reduction, which is basically 1 minus CMF. So 1 minus 0.8 is PECR is 0.2. So we multiply that with the average annual estimated property damage only, and then we get that figure. So that's 388,000 for this project. So similarly, we'll calculate that to all the projects, and then we'll normalize that and rank this measure based on all values. The second crash rate measure is basically looking at which allows us for a better comparison between projects on different routes with different volumes. So it looks at the volume consideration, the AEDT, the annual traffic. That was like 17,000 in this segment based on VDOT's ADT. And then we convert that into million vehicle miles traveled, which we call as MVMT. So that's basically multiplying the ADT by the length of the project in this case, which is I think a little bit more than a mile, and then multiplying that with 365 days so that we get the yearly rates, and then multiplying that, dividing that by 1 million. So we just wanted to look at 1 million vehicle miles. Based on that, we get the expected reduction, 48,000. And this would be compared to highway projects. As I mentioned earlier, transit projects would only have the as well as other projects would just have the crash frequency as 100%. So any questions on safety? Or we can ask the questions towards the end. Okay, so let's go to another goal category, environmental and land use. We basically combine these categories together. So we have 4 performance measures: sensitive features, air pollution, VMT per capita, and then a connection to activity centers. So I'll talk all these 4 different measures in detail. So the first one is the sensitive features, the overlap with the sensitive features. So sensitive features basically is wetlands, species, habitat, conservation land, 100-year floodplains, sea level rise, we consider 2 feet, and then storm surge, category 2. So these are all the areas in the region. We took all these different layers, and then we combined them, union those in geographical GIS terms, and then this layer, we created this layer. So basically what we do is we look at the project sphere of influence, which is basically a tiered approach. So we have that in the appendices of the guidelines. So basically for different types of project, if it's a bike ped project, it's 0.5 mile. If it's a highway project in lesser than major arterials, it's 1 mile, and then major projects in interstate and major arterials, it's 2 mile. So based on that buffer, oh, I'm sorry, for this, I'm sorry, that's for other categories. For land use, all we consider is 1/4 mile in all projects. We don't take the tiered approach. So any project, any type of projects, we just looked at 1/4 mile from the project. We make a buffer to that project and then compare the total area within that buffer, and then the area which can be considered as sensitive areas. So in this project, Bailey Bridge Connector project, we did a 1/4 mile buffer, and the red areas, those areas are basically the sensitive areas. The purple, that's the project. The red line is the buffer line. So based on that percentage overlap, we can see that the it's almost 10%. So that's raw value is 0.10. So we did similar buffering for all the different 6 projects we tested. And based on this, I think the Pole Green Road widening project that has the least sensitive features within the project vicinity, that's 1%. So based on the normalized value, the lowest gets the highest value in this case. The least amount of overlap, the highest the project gets the score. So that's 100. And then based on that, the score with other projects, we just ranked other projects. We just provided the normalized value with other projects based on that. So one thing to notice is that we can see that the ATP trail, that covers a lot of area, 0.31%. And the normalized value is 0 because that's the least, that's the project which covers the most. But in actual practice, what we'll do is we'll look at any projects like the trail projects that won't do any harm. The only thing which can be made in that area, obviously, is the trail projects. So that would, any trail projects won't be considered for this. So even though its normalized value is 0 here, just for the sake of the exercise, in actual scoring, that project won't get any negative value in this scoring. So the next one is air pollution. So the Richmond region historically has problems meeting the ozone standard. So that's why we included just the 2 pollutants, which are basically the ozone precursors, the NOx and the VOC, rather than including all the 5 categories, which would include the sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, and then particulate matter 2.5 and particulate matter 10. We didn't include that, just the major pollutants in the region. So what we basically are looking at is the ton of the reduction in the tonnage of emissions of these 2 particular pollutants over a period of one year attributed to the project. So basically what happens is that once we have any modification to the project attributed to the project, if it's actually increasing the congested speed, the emission rates actually decrease. Based on the research, I guess the emission rates actually decrease till 60 miles per hour. And then after that point, it increases. So if it's a heavily congested corridor or a segment, and the congested speed increases based on the project implementation, it actually is a benefit to that air quality emission. We get reduction in that in the tonnage of those pollutants. So that will actually be benefit. We are still tweaking this measure. Currently, what we are using is the VMT to calculate the NOx and VOC, and not considering the speed. But I think we are working out to consider the speed as well, because just considering the VMT won't give actual benefits to our projects. So we are still tweaking on it, but based on what we have now, we just looked at the 2 different projects, North Gayton Road and Pole Green Road widening. So based on those 2 projects, I didn't normalize the actual value because this is just 2 projects. So one will get 100, the other would 0. So those are the raw values. Those are North Gayton. If that interchange is made, I guess the reduction would be 41.38 ton. That's because the decrease in the VMT. As you can see in the network diagram in the left, that there's no interchange in the first no-build scenario, and in the later one we have the interchange. So any person which wants to go to 64 has to take the additional route to go into 64, which would obviously increase the VMT. So based on that, the air pollution, we have certain we have certain benefit of air pollution. The other measure, which is pretty simple, is the VMT per capita. This project we measure in the region-wide scale, not individual project limit. So what we do is basically we code the project, no build and build scenario in the travel demand model, and then we calculate the system-wide VMT. And then we divide that system-wide VMT with the total population of the region, and then we can get the VMT per capita. And then we subtract the no build build VMT to the no build VMT, and if it's a positive number, then we get points to that measure. So basically, we can see that the North Gayton Road interchange, the VMT per capita increase, the deduction was 0.051. Similarly, the Bowling Green Road widening project, 0.012. So again, we just did 2 projects because we have to run the model to do that. Each model run takes a lot of time, at least 3 hours to do that. So that's why it was limited to just 2 projects. So that's what we can see. Pretty basic VMT per capita. Let's go to the other measure, which is basically connection to activity center. So based on our socioeconomic data, data which we developed for 2017 and 2045, we delineated at least 20 regional activity centers in the region based on the concentration of population and employment. Based on the DRPT's multimodal guidelines, we standardize those into different categories. And then based on those categories, we establish those boundaries. So the boundary is not limited to an intersection or a little bit segment. It's the whole TAZ, because that's our area of analysis. So what we are looking in this performance measure is basically the change in the activity units, which is basically the population plus employment from 2017 to 2045. Attributed to the project, which is basically if the project overlaps that activity center, any activity center. If it's more than one activity center, then we'll add all those different activity centers. And we calculate that based on the percentage of overlap from 2017 to 2045. So we can see that we did this into 2 different projects. The examples here, the Woodman Road extension as well as the ATP trail. Again, the buffering is based on the project here. So if it's a bike ped project, transit stop, the sphere of influence of that project is 0.5 miles. If it's a highway project, depending upon the category, whether if it's an interstate or arterial, major arterial, that's going to be 2 miles. Otherwise, it's going to be 1 mile. So based on this project, I think it's 1 mile. The ATP trail is 0.5 mile, and the other project is 1 mile. You can see the red shaded area, that's one of the activity centers, and can see the overlap. So basically, we calculate the percentage of overlap and then convert it into activity units, which is basically population plus employment, the change from 2017 to 2045. So as we can see, again, Woodman Road extension that has had the maximum activity units change from 17 to 2045. Actually 5,288. That's a lot. That's the amount of change in activity units. So that projects, when we normalize that, gets 100. And similarly, other projects based on the score, based relative to the highest scoring project, gets the points. So as we know, not all projects would have an overlap. So this measure basically measures the importance of activity centers, the importance of having a project built in those activity centers, and overall the connection between transportation and land use. Okay, so let's go to the mobility, which is basically congestion. And these measures are also, again, directly aligned with the smart scale measure, which is what they use. Basically 2 measures, person throughput and person hours of delay. So basically person throughput is, first we calculate the throughput is basically, the auto throughput is basically defined as the the amount of vehicle which could pass through a certain segment within certain time. In our case, we are considering the peak period, which is 6:30 to 8:30 in the AM and 4 to 6 in the evening time. And that's going to be the peak period throughout the region. So the autos which pass within that project limit within that particular time, that's the the auto throughput. And then we multiply that with the average occupancy of that vehicle, which comes from the National Highway Transportation Survey, NHTS. And the last survey which did a Virginia add-in was in 2009. So based on that, the average occupancy in Virginia is 1.54. So we multiply that with the total number of vehicles to get the project throughput. The second one is actually measuring the congested speed and the delays. So we assume that certain projects, they have a speed limit. So that's the free flow speed limit. And in the actual speed, which we see in reality, that's the congested speed. So based on that, those two factors, we can calculate what is called as the delay. So basically what we are looking at is the reduction of that delay from base year to the future year attributed to that project. So I think this project is, again, Pole Green Road widening from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. And we can basically see the volumes in the built environment increasing, which would, again, decrease the congested speed, increase the congested speed, which would increase the throughput in this project. At the same time, would reduce the person's hours of delay. So similar with North Gayton Road projects, we can see the daily volumes. Since this is a new project, we didn't have any volumes for the interchange. So that's additional volume which creates. So based on our model run for these two different projects, the Gayton Road interchange at I-64 and Pole Green Road widening, the person throughput, the change in person throughput from base year to the future, it's not the absolute throughput, but the change in person throughput from 2017 to 2045 was a little bit more than 8,000 people in that peak period of 4 hours, 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening per day. And similarly, the hours of reduction was a lot, 133,167 for the Gayton Road, and then 75,000 something for the Pole Green Road. So this is just, again, 2 projects which we did for test run. Again, when we have this for all different projects, we'll calculate the person hour of delay as well as the person throughput, and then normalize that. For other mode projects, we have to make an estimate of the VMT reduction based on that project. So if let's talk about the freight project or a barge project, we can calculate the total amount of trucks which is removed because of that barge project, and then we can calculate the VMT removed because of that project, and then convert the VMT into person throughput. So for alternative modes, I think we have to use those kind of assumption. Obviously, would be based on case-by-case basis, and we are still working to develop a full-fledged methodology for alternative modes. We know that the VMT assumption is what VDOT or OIP uses for smart scale as well. The other measure is economic development. We have 3 different factors: job growth, connection to truck intensive areas. This is the new one which we added from last time, and then the truck throughput. So the job growth, it basically looks at the job growth attributed to the project from base year to the future year in 0.25 miles buffer. So what we do is basically we map the project, again, the Pole Green Road widening. We took that project, and then since that project is in tier 2, which means the sphere of influence of that project is 1 mile, we had the 1 mile buffer. And to calculate the job growth, we did multiple buffers, 0.25. What we are looking is basically the depreciation within each ring. So for this project, since it's 1 mile project, the depreciation would be 25% within each ring. So what we are basically looking at the change of job from 2017 to 2045 in each individual ring as it is overlapped with that particular TAZ. You can see the TAZ numbers in the background. And then for the first ring, we'll have 100%. And the second ring, we depreciate that by 25%. Third ring, same thing. Fourth ring, we depreciate again by 25%. And basically calculate the job growth from 2017 to 2045 based on these criteria. So again, we looked at the 6 different projects, and we have the raw values for the Pole Green Road widening. It's 137. That's basically the net change, net addition of growth from 2017 to 2045. The highest rating project with the 6 projects we had was obviously Gayton Road interchange. A lot of concentration of population employment around that area. So 757, that was the raw change of growth, job growth. So when we normalize that, we get 100. And then similarly, Route 1 transit line in Chesterfield County, that ranked second, got a normalized value of 99, and so on. The other second measure is basically the second and the third measure has to do with freight, because that's an area which we have to, it's a measure importance in the LRTP, and that we have to measure as well. So as I have mentioned earlier, in LRTP, the consideration is the movement of both people and goods. So basically these 2 measures, the economic development as well as the truck throughput, is basically looking at the truck, improvement in the truck areas. So as you can see in the map, the red highlighted areas are the truck intensive areas in the Richmond region. So normally the employee is higher than the usual concentration of industrial or warehousing land, which uses specific truck generating activity, like a truck stop or intermodal transfer facility or a trucking firm office. So you can see the port is in that area. We have the airport, we have certain quarries, we have warehouses. I think the theme park, King's Dominion, that's also a high truck zone. So basically what we are looking at is totally similar to the activity center, nearness to the activity center. So if a project is near the truck intensive areas, we code the project, and based on the standard project tiers, we again use a buffer, and then we calculate the change in truck intensive areas. So here is a little bit different. The truck intensive areas are basically truck intensive units are basically jobs related to agriculture, mining, construction, manufacturing, transportation, and retail and wholesale trade, basically, which would use a lot of trucks. And those areas basically are truck generating areas. So the change in the truck intensive jobs from the base year to the future year, that's what we are looking at. So again, in this project, I guess Route 1, the new transit line, that's the highest. Gets the highest value, normalized value of 100, followed by the Bellybridge connector, then and the Gayton Road interchange. So the next one is truck throughput, which is similar to the person throughput, but we are just looking at the trucks, not all vehicles. So based on the Federal Highway Vehicle Category classification, we have 13 categories. So number one, category 1 is motorcycles, 2 is passenger cars, 3 is 4-tire single unit units, and then category 4 is buses. So category 5 is medium trucks or light trucks. So that's it would be great to include that in our calculation of truck throughput, but we are not considering that. We are only considering heavy trucks, which means category 6 to category 13. So what we are basically looking at is the increase in truck throughput throughout the day. We are not looking at any specific peak period because there's no peak period for truck. There might be for certain corridors, but it might be different for the whole reason. So what we are looking at is basically whole day net change in truck throughput from base year to the future year. For FHWA vehicle category 6 to 13. So we don't have the medium truck distinction in our model, and they are considered as normal vehicles. But some sophisticated models in some of the other MPUs have that medium truck as well. But we don't have that. So that's why we're just considering heavy trucks. So we're basically looking at the change in truck throughput. And again, we did the Gayton Road interchange project as well as the Bowling Green Road widening. And Gayton Road, there was a additional 500 more trucks because of that interchange. And Bowling Green Road widening, 362. So again, we just did 2 projects. That's why we didn't normalize, but this would be normalized again. And then the final measure is equity and accessibility. So we have 4 measures here. Basically access to jobs, and then same measures just looking at the environmental justice areas, and then access to destinations, and access to destinations again just for the environmental justice area. So overall, you can see that the 40% of the weight is to easy areas. That means 40% of 25% is 10%. So overall, the equity factor in our plan attributable to any project is 10%. So again, for equity, for accessibility, what we are basically looking is calculating the delta change in average access to jobs as a result of plan improvement, which could be the decrease in congested speed. The increase in the speed based on the roadway improvements, could be the change in transit frequency or addition of stops, or could be any pedestrian or bike improvement, which would improve the accessibility to that mode. So we are looking at that change and looking at the average job, which is accessible from each TAG to all the TAG. So even though this project, this is the Pole Green project, which I am showing, the accessibility change is not limited to this project. The accessibility change is throughout the region. Because for example, let's say I live 10 miles away from I-95 lane addition in Belvedere Street. And I take that exit every day. So even though I'm outside that sphere of influence of that project, if there is an addition of lane, I reach my destination earlier because of that change in accessibility. That's why we are measuring the accessibility change for all TAGs to all TAGs. So from each TAG to all TAGs. So the conceptual diagram you can see is that, so we are just looking at TAG 1. So that's the average travel time to all the different TAGs based on certain time factors. So what we are doing, considering, is taking 30 minutes for autos and 45 minutes for transit. Other modes would be 30 as well, like biking and walking. All those modes would be 30 minutes. For transit, it's going to be 45 minutes. So basically, the amount of more jobs we can reach within 45 minutes from a specific location, which is attributable to that project. So in the second diagram below, we can see that because of the trip distance increase, because of the change in congested speed, the same timeline, within the same time frame, we can reach further. So before we could only reach to TAZ 4 from 1 within that time frame, but we can reach in TAZ 5 now, and TAZ 10 and TAZ 15. So we just basically look at the increase in average job accessibility because of those. So again, the measurement unit is TAZs, and we have jobs for each TAZ. So if we can reach one more TAZ within that certain time period, that's an additional TAZ, and then we'll subtract that from the base year's no-build conditions TAZ job, total jobs, and then that would be the total number of new jobs attributable to that project. And then we'll divide that to the total population to get the average accessibility per person. So in the example here in Paul Green Road, again, it shows the speed when the project was 1 lane, which is no build scenario, as well as when we added 1 more lane in each direction, we can see a significant change in the speed. Because of that gain in speed, we can reach more further areas. So that's basically the concept. So this is a very complicated tool. We have to use the output from the travel demand model, as well as we are developing a R-based tool, which we are calling as the RRTPO accessibility tool, which is still being developed. The consultants Coordino group is working on that. So we haven't had the actual opportunity to work on that, but this is how it will function. The second thing in access to jobs is looking at access to jobs for the easy areas. So basically the environmental justice areas, as you can see in the map, that was based on 6 different criterias, population criterias: minority population, low income population, basically from poverty, senior population, disabled population, limited English proficiency, as well as zero car ownership. So based on all these 16 criteria, some of the criteria were weighted higher, like the minority population and the low income population, which is basically a requirement from FHWA in Title VI. So those were weighted more. The other categories were weighted less. And then we provided for each TAZ or census tract, whatever geography we were calculating, we calculated easy score for each of those TAZs or census tract. And then based on our local knowledge as well as statistical measures, we established a cutoff score. And based on that cutoff score, these are the areas in the Richmond region which would be considered environmental justice areas or communities of concern. So what we are basically looking in this measure is that only looking at the accessibility change for easy population who is residing within these areas. So before, what we are looking was from all population to all areas. Now we are just looking at the population who is residing within these areas to all areas in the region, attributable to that particular project. The other thing, in similar manner, we looked at jobs, but other things, other destinations like grocery stores, pharmacies, healthcare facilities, parks, government centers, libraries, things like that are also important. So we just wanted to see what would be the destination change attributable to this project, again, within 30 minutes for all projects. So in this case, 30 minutes is the time limit, travel time for all projects, all different modes of projects. The number of more destinations which can be reached within that time frame. So basically for destinations, what we did is we again weighted the destinations based on critical and non-critical. So pharmacies and healthcare facilities and groceries, they were critical. So they got a multiplier of 1.5, and the all others didn't get any multiplier. And again, within each categories, we weighted the destinations again. So let's talk about grocery stores. So Walmart, if there's a Walmart in that particular TAZ, it gets the Walmart gets the highest value. It's 5. So anything which is lower than that, let's say a Food Lion would get 4, a Lidl would get 3, and a convenience store would get 1. So we weighted the destination based on the actual size of that destination. Similar with the healthcare, if it's a major hospital, that gets the highest score. If it's a small doctor's office, it gets the lowest score. The healthcare was, again, cropped at a maximum score of 20, because a lot of these doctors' office it's itself located near the hospitals and things like that. So we just didn't want to give more points based on the numerous doctors' office we had. So that was capped to 20. But all other destinations was not capped. And based on the maximum score, TAG can have a maximum destination score of 100 in theory. In actuality, I think it's 78. So we basically look at the change of destination attributable to that project within that time travel. And we are looking as destination per 1,000 people, because destination, unlike jobs, the number is pretty less. So its maximum is 100. So if we just divide that by total population, that number would be too small. So to normalize that, we are just looking at destination per 1,000 people. So that's what we are calculating on this. Similarly, the destination to environmental justice population, same concept. We are just looking at the destinations change from that environmental justice area for environmental justice population, not all population. So those were the 15 different performance measures. And we are still trying to tweak some of them to get better results. The accessibility tool, again, our consultants is working on it. It's a significantly complex tool to calculate. So I hope they will finish in time so that we'll be able to at least test some projects and show you the results next time. So this would be what a typical sheet would look like. Again, we are basing this similar to Smart Scale. So we'll have all these different goal factors, and then the performance measures within each goal factors. And then the value, in this case, this was the Pole Green Road widening projects. I guess we did measure everything for this project except for accessibility. And in some cases, we have normalized value because we had six projects, but in some cases, I have just put down there the actual raw value. So this is how it will look like. So we'll have the PM value, and then each PM value within that particular goal would be have a weight. So it'll be multiplied with that weight. And again, that would give us the goal value. And then we'll have the goal weights, which we need to decide as we had discussed earlier. And then based on that goal weight, we'll multiply the goal value to get the weighted goal value. And then we'll add all these different weighted goal values to get the project benefit. Obviously, the maximum score would be 100. And then obviously we need the project score. We input the project score, and then we divide the project benefit by the project score in cost of 10 millions. I think that still should be suitable to us. If not, we can tweak that to 5 million or 1 million, whatever it's the average or median request for LRTP projects. As we can see, everything is relative. It's not that one project is really good. It really depends upon what all projects we have. So we'll have this kind of sheet for all these different projects. It's a lot of work for staff. It's a lot of technical work. I think we have maxed out in our staffing capacity as well as the technical capability to work out on these 15 measures. It's a big change from what we did last time. So I hope that we'll be able to perform this in time. Before we have any discussion, just next steps would be staff would be working to tweak the methodology to some of the PMs to get better results, especially the throughput and the air quality, in which we'll make speed consideration rather than just considering VMT. We'll try to complete the RRTPO accessibility tool and test projects and actually see the scores based on that tool. We'll do additional project testing, focus on other modes, non-highway modes, which is a little bit complicated as we have to make a lot of assumptions in those cases. And and then finalize the project evaluation and scoring guidelines, any tweaks and any comments provided by you by January 18th, and then provide that to you in the next agenda for LRTP Advisory Committee, which is going to be around January 28th, I guess. And next step for the LRTP Advisory Committee is that any general suggestions, any comments, apart from what we discussed today, if that you can provide that by January 10th, that would be very helpful. If there is a major concern or any disagreement with any of the performance measures, or if you have any alternative suggestions we have to have that with the methodology to measure that. If you are in disagreement with any of these, we obviously need those earlier. So provide that by December 22nd. And then any concern, any comments should be talked through before the next advisory committee meeting, which is January 28th. And I would request an endorsement from this group to the process that which we'll opt. And I think that's all I have.
Thank you, Sulab. I guess we'll get into questions. I have one question. Would it be possible to score a project in a rural locality to see how that falls out? As a rural locality, I think it makes sense to prioritize investment in the more populated areas, but in some of the criteria, there's no way that the rural localities could score, I don't think. So like Goochland, Powhatan, New Kent don't have any EJ areas, and Powhatan, New Kent, Charles City don't have any activity centers. So I guess we can't get those points, which is okay, but I think the scoring criteria should incentivize investment in the populated areas, but not make it impossible for us rural localities to try to get safety improvements or that kind of thing. So I'd like to see how a rural project scores, with considering that we don't have some of these criteria.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. We'll definitely test some of the rural projects as well. And I agree with you. The rural localities don't have any activity centers as we have delineated. But the good news is that they do have some of the truck intensive areas. Those are in the rural localities as well. So that's a little bit consideration, I guess. We'll definitely try to score rural projects and see how it goes.
Can I ask a couple of questions?
Yeah.
All right, so this is Ben Campbell. Sulab, just that was an incredible presentation, and the detail of it is amazing. But 3 questions, all dealing with public transit, which you don't have to answer, but I'd like you to consider. I heard you mention a 30-minute limit when you're looking at destination. I don't know if you have the same one on jobs, but I would double that for transit. Most people who take transit understand it's not as fast as a car, and it really does, that limits the impact. And the impact of public transit for people who really use it is other things than the speed of the movement. So I'd go for an hour on that, especially for jobs. We put this thing in on Route 1. It actually connects the entire metro area, and you can get a job anywhere that GRTC serves because of that route. And so it's important. Second, there should be some premium for transit over car that deals with the fact that transit includes 100% of the population, whereas cars only include 80%. And that's just a basic factor that is not built into our funding systems. All that is, anytime we spend large amounts of money on automobile routes, we in fact exclude between 10 and 20% of the population. And then the third question, which I didn't really understand, and you may already have answered it, is that the difference in air quality when you're dealing with transit as opposed to automobiles is significant. So one ought to be actually If one were evaluating transit, one should actually get credit for cars taken off the road. And if one is building new road lanes, one will in fact be increasing traffic. There's never been a new road built that didn't in fact increase the number of cars and the amount of development. So those are just three things, and I don't need you to answer them. I just wanted to bring them up.
Yeah, thank you for those questions. The first question, for jobs, we are looking at 30 minutes from autos and 45 minutes from by transit. I think Smart Scale uses 45 minutes by autos and 1 hour for transit. But since the average commute time by auto in our region was 24 minutes, that's why we considered 30 minutes for auto. But definitely 1 hour for transit. People take transit, more than 45 minutes for jobs. So definitely I'll put that into, definitely change that to 1 hour.
Thank you.
With destinations, for all modes, we are considering 30 minutes. So
I heard that, but that's not real for people who ride transit. That's
right. So yeah, we need to have more discussion on this, and I would ask the group to provide me suggestions. I'm ready to do whatever the group suggests. The second question was about. Let me ask the third, answer you the third question, which is basically the reduction air quality improvement based on transit project. And yeah, I agree with that. So what we are basically doing is we are calculating the surrogate VMT, which is the vehicle mile travels, based on the ridership of that particular transit route. So based on the VMT, there is per mile, we can calculate per mile emission based on VMT. So based on the transit ridership, we can calculate what was the VMT reduced because of that transit project. And multiplying that VMT with the emissions, we can actually get the number of tonnage reduction based on that transit project. So that's definitely what we're going to be used for transit projects. For autos, I take into consideration, and I agree with that with the addition of new lanes or new highway infrastructure, there's always an induced traffic. So even though we might be increasing the congested speed, there's always induced traffic. So that will be captured in the travel demand model. If the project is overall increasing the VMT, then that's a negative for this air quality. So we want to see that the VMT, the vehicle miles traveled, is actually decreasing. So if the VMT is increasing, that would give a negative score, or we won't give a negative score, but it won't provide any points for that highway project. But at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, we are also considering speed. So if it's a very congested corridor, like let's give an example of Northern Virginia, 995, it's so congested that when you're idling, there's a lot of emissions coming up. And if you increase the speed, if we add a lane which decreases the congestion, as I mentioned earlier, if the speed reaches till 60, there's actually a decrease in emissions. But if it crosses 60 miles per hour, then there's again an increase in emissions. So we'll consider that speed factors as well for the highway projects. The second question, I agree with that, but I don't know how we'll implement that. I'm ready for any suggestions from the group.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Andrew?
Yes, sir.
This is Joe Videnis. I just forwarded a little spreadsheet to Nicole, and I was wondering if she could share her screen or share that spreadsheet on her screen, because I think it will help.
I think I have that as well, Joe.
So I can share it. Just give me 1 minute.
I sent Nicole the very latest. I've been tweaking it as we've been going, Sulab.
Okay, sure.
So what I've done, and I also want to commend Sulab. This is just an enormous undertaking. I just can't imagine trying to process all of this information over 200 plus projects or whatever it is. So I definitely tip my hat to you and staff. And I was talking to Sulab just before this meeting about the weighting, and he explained some things that definitely enlightened me. But what I've done here is I took the transportation priority rankings and normalized them to and then applied a rounding factor. So in other words, in our agenda package on page 8, there are transportation priorities listed there. Ranked. This was based upon a survey, as Sulab points out, an unscientific survey, but nevertheless, I took those rankings. I combined environment and land use because that's how they were combined in terms of the goals, but they were actually separate questions in the survey. So I took the results, added them, and divided by 2. That's what the 4.0 is. Then I normalized it and rounded, and you can see the rounded figures, 25% for safety, 15% for mobility, and so forth. Then I compared that with the smart scale weighting, which Sulab provided in his presentation. And then again, I compared that with what is, I guess, recommended in this staff report, and just kind of looked across the 3 line items. And I don't know that I'm necessarily prepared to make a recommendation at this point, but I will note a couple things. One observation is that just taking the normalized rankings and comparing with smart scale compares pretty closely, except for safety, whereas smart scale has it at 20 and the normalized would have it at 25%. And then that equity access item. It's not as comparable with the TPO recommendations, as you can see. And I really, honestly, I don't know. I haven't pondered this long enough to, does it make sense that we're consistent with smart scale? I mean, on its face, it would seem to make some type of sense that we are consistent, that, VDOT's regional goals, which have been approved by the TPO or voted on by the TPO, are consistent with what we're using in our long range planning. Maybe that makes sense. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe we cover more bases if we have one funding program that uses one metric and another funding program that looks at another metric. So if you don't work out in one, maybe your chances are better in the other. I don't know, but I wanted to share this with everybody just to consider as you consider everything else that's been presented in formulating your thoughts and recommendations on this. Thank you.
Thanks for pulling that together, Joe. I think that's really helpful to see laid out.
Yeah, one thing I just like to point out is that we based many of the measures from smart scale because those measures which was already vetted by the staff and the experts, that was easy to measure for us as well, because it's already been vetted by the expert and endorsed by the community. But LRTP is much more than smart scale. It covers all projects. It's not just smart scale projects. It's all projects in all funding categories, even rail projects and transit projects and maintenance projects, which is outside the smart scale. So just wanted that to make into consideration as well.
Yes. Thank you. That's a good point. I would just say this. I think the one thing that it did strike me that mobility was as low as it was. I know that it didn't, and the survey didn't score very high. And as Sulab explained to me when I was speaking with him, that mobility is really referring to congestion. And, applying the smell test to the greater Richmond region, I don't believe that we do have a significant congestion problem, but there are areas of very severe congestion that we all experience. 288, Bryan Park, those are some that come to mind. right off the bat. I'm sure there are others. So it's an issue, maybe not the top issue, but maybe a little bit higher than where we have it. And that's it. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Sulab.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, the other thing which I just wanted to point out is the accessibility measure, in which we have 40% as equity. So that's something we want to keep. At least 10% of the total project scoring, that should be at least considered for equity, so that we have an equitable plan.
Does anyone else have any questions, concerns, comments, or anything that other members have said?
Hi, good afternoon. This is Barb Nelson. I have one question, and Sulab, we can follow up later if that's easier.
Sure.
Again, thanks for a great presentation and all the details. And I understand the model limitations. I'm not a modeler, but I do understand from your good teaching in the past about the limitations that we have in our model with regards to truck traffic, or the modeling the truck intensive areas. And I appreciate you including that in there. But from a long-range transportation planning process, with so many of the e-commerce trips being in trucks that are below Class 6, is that something that perhaps would be a consideration for the next long-range transportation plan? Or is there a consideration for how to address e-commerce impacts on the transportation system? Because it is a class of trucks that is a freight move.
Yeah, that's a great question. When we were updating the model this time, that was a great talk we had with VDOT. But based on what the budget for the model development was, and based on how the travel demand model in Virginia in general are, the category 5 wasn't included because that was significant work to do with it. And the other logic which the modelers presented me was that the pattern for those medium trucks is more recognizable with the auto travel rather than the heavy truck travel. That's why they are still included in the autos. But as I mentioned, a more sophisticated model, and we will obviously try to achieve that next time, has that distinction of class 5 as a different mode as well. And it's pretty important because of the non-job works, which has increased over the time because of the Amazon deliveries and things like that. Non-home shopping. Previously, people would go to different shopping areas. That trip has decreased, and the Amazon trips and USP trips, those trips has increased. So that's have definitely not been captured in our model at present, but definitely a thing to look at in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have anything they can share with Sulab or bring up? So Sulab, it sounds like you'd like us to provide any comments by January 10th.
Right.
Or really significant by December 22nd. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, if no one has anything else, I guess we can move on to the next agenda item. We'll talk a little bit more about the plan development schedule. I guess that's Sulab.
Yeah. So we are in the last leg of this last run leg for this LRTP. The adoption date has to happen by October of next year. So just wanted to give a general heads up on what's coming. For task 2, As Barbara mentioned, we currently are in the public review of vision, goals, and objective. Once that's done, we'll go to the board for formal adoption in January. For task 3, we are still working on finalizing the projects, and we would try to finish that by January 10th and provide you at least 2 weeks to review the final universe of projects, which will then go to a formal public review period once we have some comments from you from January 25th to February 8th. And still after that, we have some time till February 25th in which we'll ask for the actual adoption of the project, universe of projects by this group. Task 4, programming, basically 2 different things. One is project prioritization, which we discussed today. The approval or the endorsement, we are asking for the endorsement next meeting, which is January 28th. Staff, in the other hand, parallelly will start scoring on the projects from January to April. Same time, we'll be working on the constraint plan development. We have requested revenue projection to VDOT. I think we'll request the DRPT for their projections, revenue projection in January. I think we'll have a couple of meetings to discuss about what budget we have and what type of changes we want in the current funding mechanism based on mode. So we'll have a couple of meetings to discuss that. And once we have the project scored, based on whatever the budget we have, only certain projects would be in the constraint list. So that would be the final constraint list of projects. Anything outside of that constraint list, which is in the universe of projects, would be in the vision list. Any other project which is not in the universe of projects, but and which we considered local and programmatic projects, will still be consistent with the long-range transportation plan. So again, we have to have a formal public review period for the draft constrained list of projects from April 1st to 15th. And then it'll come back to LRTP Advisory Committee for the final approval of the constraint plan in April 22nd. And then the board again has to approve this once the LRTP Advisory Committee approves this, and that currently we have scheduled for May 6th. Similarly, then we have a few other tasks. Task 5, which is basically the evaluation of the plan. So basically, we look at the transportation performance measures, both the federal performance measures as well as some specific performance measures for this plan. Overall plan, not project level. The overall plan consideration project performance measures. Then we have to do the environmental justice analysis for the base, the no-build, and the full implementation of the plan. Similarly, the accessibility analysis for the overall implementation of the plan. So staff will provide presentations to the LRTP Advisory Committee about the methodology and report and the results May, June, and then around June time period, we'll present that. We need to do air quality conformity for this as well. That would be a combined thing with the Tri-Cities MPO long-range transportation plan, their previous one, because the next one, I think they're still working on that, as well as the latest TIP. So VDOT Environmental Agency would be the lead on this. We'll have an interagency consultation. For the time being, I'm putting it in June. And then we need to have a formal public review period just for air quality conformity. And we're trying to align this with the plan's final public review. So let's see what happens. And then task 6, which is the document development. The final draft public review would be July 31st, and then final draft adoption September 15th. So once we have the final public review period, which is going to be a month time, we'll ask the board to open the formal public period in August, and that might change a little bit. And then formal public period a month's time. For now, we have August 15 to September 15, but that can be tweaked a bit. And then once the public review period, the final public review period has been completed, we'll add any public comments in the final document and then ask for LRTP Advisory Committee's final approval in September of this year. And once the LRTP Advisory Committee approves this, it'll go to the RRTPO Policy Board for approval in October 7th. One thing I've mentioned, forgot to mention, was that once in the formal public review period, we also plan to present this plan to all the 9 localities, town council meeting or Board of Supervisors meeting. So that needs to be scheduled as well at that time. So we have to present that to the all the 9 localities. And then once we have that, we'll present to the board. And once the board approves that, we need some time for tweaking it, adding the endorsement and things like that, and then printing some copies for local libraries and FSWA, FTA. The current plan is to provide them by October 15th. The deadline is October 31st, so at least 15 days ahead of time. So that's the schedule I have. A lot of work coming up next year. Yeah, and I think that's all I have. If you have any further questions, just reach out to me or Chet or Barb, and we will be happy to answer any questions. The major focus again at this time is the finalization of the guidelines for project scoring, as well as the universe of projects, which we are working simultaneously. And that's all I have. Thanks.
Does anyone have any final questions or thoughts for the committee or staff? Well, thanks again for participating. It looks like our next meeting is January 28th. Is that correct, Sula?
Mm-hmm.
And again, in the meantime, they should issue comments in the next few weeks about the scoring they have, and otherwise we'll be reading on the 28th.
Thank you, Andrew. And I wish everybody happy holiday season and happy New Year. We'll see everybody, I guess, still virtually early January next year, late January. Thank you so much.
Thank you.